This is Caboyacocha, again, Rio Amazonas. It's a lake beside the river changes course over a period of time, and there's lots of big freshwater lakes that are made because the Amazon used to make that curve and it doesn't anymore, and that's one of these places. That's Father DL was looking for some counsel as to how better to tie the airplane to the raft so it doesn't get away. 4 musketeers from Satipo. They're Jean-Francois Tachereau is a Canadian. He's to your right, no, to your left. And Manolo was a Peruvian trainee. And Luis Schenk was another Canadian that was flying there at that point, and I'm beside him. That was our team in Satipo. This is the board of directors that I knew when I first started flying with them. At this point, when I was around, I was invited to their meetings, and Tony De Rosa is right in front of me. He's the director of the school, SIU, Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, the aviation department. And I know most of those people, but Bill Edwards is sitting clear on the end, and Joe Faping is about halfway up, and George Hadaway is all the way up, and Paul Rogers. I'm missing a couple in the back. I know who they are, but I can't recall their name right offhand. But that was the board of directors from about 1975 maybe, I don't know, somewhere in there. By the way, I used to run around all the time without a hat, and I was wearing one today, and my better half said I should get rid of it, so I did. But my experience on that particular subject was that when we would have volunteer appreciation days or nights, if I wore my hat, people could find me, and if I didn't wear my hat, they couldn't find me. Then I was incognito. That's a loading of another patient, I believe, in Huehuetenango. It's in Guatemala. Would spend 2 weeks on the north coast of Honduras, and Wings of Hope supplied the airplane to move them around to different villages. They were doing clinics. And it was 2 weeks of real interesting work. I would get there in May, and first week I'd try to figure out, what am I doing here? This is a job for a young man, not for an old man. And then the next thing I knew, the season was gone. So you fall into a schedule, and you just exist until it's over. But that's a picture of a beaver. It was an opportunity to fly beaver. I always wanted to fly a beaver. And it's a real joy to fly behind the 985, the round engine, but the airplane itself is not an airplane, it's a truck. It doesn't do anything but lift a heavy load for a short distance and leave it. That's really all it's really capable of. It doesn't fly specifically well. Most airplanes fly better than it does.
Nice hat.
Well, the reason for the hat, of course, is the hair is going. So I got to cover it up with something. Yeah. Well, you're
some of the mechanics I had at Charles Taylor's side.
There's the family in Satipo, I believe. The 2 boys were born in Iquitos on the Amazon River. And then we went to Satipo for 2 years. We were 5 years in Iquitos and 2 years in Satipo. We had a hangar at Satipo. Didn't originally have one. It would sit outside all the time, but we did have. They finally built a hangar, and that's the airplane that I picked up in Wichita. I took to Trois Rivières in Quebec to do a skull kit installation, and then took it to Peru through the Magdalena Valley in Colombia. Good trip. Oh, and then this is float maintenance. Erosion is always a problem. You need to keep them painted, and so it's depth. So that at least once a year, the airplane came out of the water on that dolly, and we cleaned up the floats. If they needed paint, they got some paint. On the maintenance side, that's where I did my maintenance when I was in Iquitos on the river. We built that platform in the front that I'm standing on was put there specifically to change an engine once. But it's always a joy to do maintenance on the river. I've dropped too many things in the river. That's a picture of fuel tanks going inside that airplane. I'm not sure. That's Indonesia, Associated Mission Aviation. John Murray here in New Meyland built those tanks. He welds them up, and both of those go in the airplane. Fills the cabin completely with fuel, and then they have the biggest challenge is the crossing from the west coast to Hawaii. They need almost a zero wind component to do that. Of course, the winds are westerly generally, so I've had one particular one that I remember is the pilot came back. He got about halfway and decided he wasn't going to make it. So he turned around and said, "Sure, glad to have you back." And he waited for, I don't know, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, and finally got what he wanted. He got it delivered. That's 206KY. That's got a whole story in itself. But the airplane was basically, it had an accident in Kentucky Lake, and it was a pretty rough shape. But we bought the salvage and rebuilt the airplane and didn't put it back on floats. Oh, I'm the owner of a Luscombe, and that's it. 1993. That's the flood of 93, and that's it's something I really don't care to go through again. And that's the picture of the airplane after we got done with it. It was 10 years in the process of rebuilding, cleaning up the airplane. And it's sitting in Columbia, Illinois, in the hangar, and flying occasionally, not very often anymore. That's a 185 for, I believe it ended up in Indonesia. I'm trying to think. Oh, that's the one. That's the Lilly Foundation airplane, I believe. The one I flew in Paraguay for 2 years, and then it went to Central America, and after that came back to Wings of Hope, and it had a broken landing gear box that needed to be changed. And at that point, we'd come back from Paraguay and living in Low Point, where I grew up with my dad and mom. And that's behind the house. We landed on the road and drove it in the driveway and set it up there. And there were some kids that ran, neighbors down the road came, "Airplane crashed." I said, "No, it didn't crash, it just landed." And he knew nothing about it. Well, the problem was that I had my Luscombe on the farm there, and the Springfield Division of Aeronautics found it and said it couldn't be left there because it wasn't an approved airstrip. And I said, well, if they won't approve it being in the field, I just will land on the road. And so the sheriff used to go by there very slow and kind of watch what's going on, but never would stop. And gradually people forgot about it. So I brought it back here when I got done with it. A few people recognized it. Were willing to write a letter. That's pretty great. It's asking a lot.
How did you get into flying?
Clear Wings of Hope.
Yeah?
I went to Carbondale and got my pilot and mechanic license to do mission aviation. And while I was in SIU, Wings of Hope did a presentation, and I liked what I heard, and I contacted Bill Edwards and said, hey, I'd like to join. They were looking for a pilot for Peru. I said, I'd like to join you. And the director of SIU Aviation, what was his name?
Tony Earls.
Yeah, Tony DeRosa. He came from Lewis College in Romeoville, Illinois, but he was in Southern. He was in SIU as a director. You got to know him, and he insisted that I should join American Airlines or somebody. And I said, Tony, I came to school with something like Wings of Hope in mind. And once he realized that I was serious and I wasn't changing my mind, then he endorsed me. And the rest is history.
So you've only flown from Wings of Hope all these years?
Well,
That's really interesting.
I flew for, what was the name of the company? In Alaska for 3 years, after Wings of Hope. Because Will Holliday has been trying to get me to Alaska for forever. I mean, since I know him. And he always spent every summer in Alaska, different things. And so he finally says, I think I found a place you could work. And I said, well, you know what? I'll join Pacific Airways.
Okay, so you worked for an airline for like...
Well, it was a little, there was 5 airplanes, okay? 5 Beavers. And he had a good time. I spent 3 summers.
Okay.
And first summer was a challenge to get to know the area. Ketchikan, and they were flying mostly fishermen, back and forth to the lodges, and a few bear hunters and a few things like that. And then the next two years, I'd get up there, and for the first week I said, what am I doing here? It's not an old man's job, it's a young man's job. It's mostly load and unload the airplane all the time.
Yeah.
You flew a little and unloaded it and loaded it again.
Yeah.
A lot of hard work. But what happened, and after it got started, the schedule was on, and next thing I knew, the season was over in September. That's the end. Things closed down. And so I did that for 3 years.
Okay. And so you started with Wings of Hope in 1971? Okay.
We went to Peru.
Okay, that's your first job. Okay. And I know there's so many years, so 50 years plus with Wings of Hope. Do you have like one story that stands out, like a memorable flight or a memorable experience or something you can share?
There's lots of memorable flights that are worthy, but I guess probably maybe one of the most interesting things that can do with an airplane. The Ticuna engine drive was studied by a Wycliffe Riley transfer by the name of Lambert Anderson. And he bought 100 chicks, Rhode Island Reds. And so we got 10 boxes. 10 boxes went in the airplane. That's all that would go in. And I hauled those from Iquitos, from the airline, would come from Lima, and hauled those out to Cuchiacocha. And people there, some people bought 5, some people bought 4, some people bought 25, but everybody had requested so many chicks. And a lot of people here, I mean, Keith, you know what the jungle chicken looks like. A jungle chicken is a chicken without any feathers. But that's real common in the tropics. They look pretty horrendous, really. In fact, I've got an aunt that saw it once, and she said she'd never really eat chicken again. But anyway, and then a year later, you land in Ticuna in Cuchiacocha, and there's nothing but Rhode Island Reds running around. It was just neat.
So that really helped the people there as far as the food source and all that?
They changed the quality of their...
So is that still in Peru?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We were connected to the Franciscan mission. He would supply all their missions on the Amazon. They had 12 mission stations plus other people in between. So they had contact with the mission station, radio contact. And this thunderstorm was so massive that day, he didn't come back. And even the Padres, the mission, they lost power. And they came in the evening and told me, we have not heard from the plane, we don't know where he's at, we don't know what happened.
Wow.
They couldn't make contact with any of the 12 missions scattered. And so that was the night, and we already had Roberto, and I was wondering, okay, what if? What if? That was always in your mind. Next morning, 10 o'clock, the sun was shining, and he comes down the sidewalk whistling. And I asked him, what happened? Well, the weather got bad. He yelled at me and Nashi in one of the mission and spent the night there. And then he came back that morning. I said, okay. So then from now on, I know how to live. He goes off, and I don't worry until I hear from him.
Yeah.
Can't stand it. That was the only way I could survive anything.
Yeah.
And that's how it was.
Wow.
So
Did you guys raise your kids over there? Like,
yeah, we had 2 boys born down there, Roberto and Carlos, and
Okay.
Iquitos. They were raised there, yeah.
wow.
They're charapas. Charapas is a big turtle
Yeah.
that size. Lives 100 years. They're native of that area in the Amazon. We've had one in the airplane. They put it upside down and they tie a stick through its mouth and tie the feet and everything back, and it takes up the whole airplane, the 206. But it was not a problem with doing it.
So the kids played with the giraffe?
No, but
The Indians, they just call kids like that.
But somebody that's born in Loreto
Yeah.
are known as charapas.
Oh, so your kids were known as giraffes?
Well, they would be. They have
From
that
the
right.
region.
Okay.
Yeah, we were, at the time, we were flying for a company, weren't we? And we were in Kansas City, or were we just there on our own? Anyway, we were in Kansas City, and Annie had read an article about Wings of Hope. I had never heard of the organization, zero. But she's kind of a commander when she's working. So anyway, we end up coming over here. And I remember when we landed at the old hangar on the other side, there was 3 guys, I believe, standing in the open hangar door. Ed Schertz, Joe Dobronsky, and who was the
I
other?
don't know, it might have been Tommy Thompson.
Tommy Thompson. See, that was in 1994.
Oh, 94, okay.
So see, they weren't working.
Well, they heard an airplane.
I wasn't working if I stand in the door.
And anyway, we had already, we were 2/3 of the way into Peace Corps already. With one final thing we had to do, and then we had to make a final decision, yes, we're doing it. So anyway, we went in there and met with them, and we talked with them for an hour, and on the way out, somebody said, well, wait a minute, why don't you fill out an application? You might, they said, no, we don't need anybody, we only had it flying in Belize. And the guy was from France, and he'd been there for 2 years, and he had no indication of leaving.
No, he didn't.
So anyway, so we went back, filled out we were both commercial pilots. And we filled out 2 pieces of paper saying we're interested. And then we went back and said, okay, we're going to the Peace Corps. So I called them up, and we were going to call them up the next day. We got a call from Dobronsky, I believe. He said, hey, the guy is going to quit. Do you want to go to the police? And we looked at each other and said, whoa, wait a minute. So we called DC about Peace Corps, and they congratulated us on not going and telling them. He said, most people just walk away and never see them again. So anyway, we went down to Belize and flew for 2 years. And with 2 airplanes down there, Annie flew with a local. I got the privilege of flying back and forth to Merida across the Yucatan Peninsula, 2 hours of absolute nothing. I mean, just, we used to humorize ourselves by counting the ancient Mayan ruins that we could spot. We made a map of them. But anyway, I did about 3 a week, back and forth. And some of the most memorable trips I've ever made were there. A little girl by the name of Conchita had her total scalp lifted in a boating accident in Belize. And we always quit at dusk because there were no lights. And anyway, the doctor came and knocked on her door, said, oh, you got to take this girl in, she's got to go to Merida. And Belize at that time had nothing but a rusty clinic, no hospital. All serious cases went to Merida. So anyway, we looked at each other and said, can we do this? And first of all, it's illegal. Secondly, everybody told me never fly at night. But of course, Merida has lights, so if I get there, I can land. So anyway, she arranged everything. We got the little girl and her mother and her father and a nurse. And usually when we went to the international airport to check out of the country, it took us about 45 minutes to fill out all the paperwork. I got there this time and a guy met me out on the tarmac and he says, don't quit the engine, just here, sign here. And away I went. And I remember, I can't forget it, about 10 minutes out, I was still climbing. The guy came on the horn and he said, hi, are you doing okay? I said, yeah, we're climbing through 3, going. And he said, well, we're going to shut down, turn the lights off. We'll see you when you get back.
Oh my gosh.
That's why you got there good 15 minutes.
Gee, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
So anyway, 2 hours of absolute darkness, no lights, the whole distance. And finally Merida appeared. Annie did a terrific job of arranging everything, and she had an ambulance there, and medical people were there waiting for us, and there was nothing going on. It was about 10 o'clock at night. They took the girl and the father, and then I found out some really important things. For a Belizean to come into Mexico, you need a 2-day passport ahead of time. 2 days. It's got to be applied for at least 2 days ahead of time. And I got arrested because I had just transferred. And they gave me all their passports. That was nice, wasn't it? So the guys come out and they said, well, where are your passengers? And I said, well, they're gone to hospital. Here are the passports. So 2 hours later, they're still, and I knew no Spanish then. And they were sitting there at a table like this, just drilling me. And finally, they pushed the thing across the table and said, sign there. At that point, I was ready to sign anything. And then they all left. So I sat there for a little while and decided, well, I guess it's over. Never heard from them again. But anyway, and Conchita was a little girl. How old was she about?
I think she might have been about 10.
I don't even think she was that old. But anyway, 8 or 10. She was absolutely, totally, I didn't know if she was dead or alive. And that's the case with most patients when you're flying them. When you're the pilot, I don't interfere with what's going on back there. And I don't know if they're dead or alive. And so anyway, she was there for about a month. And then I was making 2 or 3 trips. Usually I'd pick up people who could come back, recovered, and I'd bring them back to Belize. So I always had somebody, and finally she was ready to come back, and she was comatose. All she could move was her eyes. It was just, you might say, isn't it neat she's alive? But boy, I looked at her and said, wow, I don't know if I did you a favor or not. Okay, 5 years later, about 5 years later, we were walking down the main, there are only 3 streets on Ambergris Key.
Okay.
Front Street, Middle Street, and Back Street. And we were walking down Middle Street, and somebody started yelling, Wings of Hope. It was the father, Conchita. And she actually, excuse me, do you want me to go on with this?
Oh, go ahead. I love, this is the story. I'll edit you down, but I like this. I want to hear the ending. I'm anticipating a happy ending.
He said, you got to come up and meet her. And I had not seen her since I delivered her back, and boy, I didn't know what I was going to see. Well, here's this young girl running around, second in her class. She was in high school then, and doing great. I couldn't believe it. She showed me her scalp, and it was all kinds. She had 4 or 5 operations, and amazing. I saw her one more time about 5 years later. She's now about 21 or 2 in college, top of her class. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, she couldn't move a toe, a finger, or anything. When I brought her back, I don't know how it happened. But
That's awesome.
I think maybe God
That is a great-
intervened
that's-
because
Yeah.
I don't think the medical professionals.
So that, and how long were you both in police?
6 months. So then we got back, went back into Peace Corps, Guatemala for 2.5 years. Learned to speak Spanish. My Spanish isn't too good, hers is excellent. So we're usually together, and if I didn't know what was going on, I'd just ask her.
Since this day is really about Eddie,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I want to say that I think he was so important to many, many people, many of us. I mean, just on and on. Like in flying, in the flying part, and then in the hangar part, and the maintenance part. And like myself, when on that application you had to put down if you were an A&P. Well, no, I wasn't an A&P.
Right.
But I said I know how to use a wrench, and
She does.
I know there's a difference between a 1/4-inch drive and a 1/2-inch drive, and you know you don't force things and so on. But anyway, and in the hangar, I mean mostly, well, far more that I didn't know that I did know. I mean, goodness me. But, and I could ask Eddie any question I wanted, and he never made me feel like a woman, or like it was foolish or anything like that. And yeah, he would tell me what I needed to know to solve my problem.
Gene, do you want to just kind of step in, like how you're connected, or?
Well, it was one interesting time we had going down there. They needed some money to fix something on the plane or something. So Doug gave me $5,000.
And $10 bills.
I had a money belt.
Yeah.
And I was scared that somebody was going to hit me over the head and steal the money. And I got in the airport. We had a medical team going down, like doctors and nurses and several other people. And we got to the airport, and I said, how will I know, who I'm supposed to meet? And they said, look for the tallest guy there. And he came walking up and said, here I am. And I said, oh my gosh, here, take the money. I don't
Doug
have
used to give us a stack of dollars, I mean, everything from 5 to 10 to 20,
We also,
maybe
they
a
told
few
us they
20, but mostly
don't do
10s.
anything with big money down there. You've got to bring fives and dollars and things like that, because
That's the way it was
they
run.
don't know how to change, 20s or 50s or anything like
And
that.
that was in Belize?
No, that was,
Or was it, okay.
Well, we were in Ecuador.
Ecuador.
that might have been in
Down there.
Ecuador.
Okay.
It might have been in,
I don't know. She came down, we used to call her G.I. Jean, because she'd come down with 10 other people, but she was always leading the pack when we were going through the timber.
well, a couple of times, when I came down, they said that none of these people had been there before, and I had been.
Yeah.
So they said I was the group leader.
Yeah,
And,
well, you were the group leader because you just out-hustled them.
we wouldn't stay in the city. We'd always be in an area where, there wasn't hardly anything except a landing strip.
Yeah.
Well, they served porcupine and stuff for lunch, and it was pretty good.
So how did you start at Wings of Hope, Gene?
Well, I started because I was a pilot. I was a 99.
Okay.
And I got my license in 1948.
Wow.
So I checked out in a Piper Cub. And
So you were 99 first, and you found out about Wings of Hope, and
yes, and then a friend of mine was a 99, and she worked here at Wings of Hope. She volunteered, so she brought me out here. And, I liked it right away. And then I was fortunate enough to be chosen to go down to South America and Central America when they sent missions out. And like I said, we always had a doctor who was in charge, and a couple of nurses, and, several other people wanted to go. The funniest thing was, we got ready to go one time, and one of the women that had volunteered to go, she said, where are we going to be staying? Which hotel? We said, we're going to be staying in a hut in the jungle, and we're going to sleep on the floor. If we're lucky, we'll have a hammock. She said, what? And I said, she said, well, I want to know where to get my hair done. Oh, I said, you're not going to get your hair done. She said, well, then I just can't go. And we thought, well, good. But we also went on a lot of missions here in the States. We cooperated with Stanbrock in Remote Area Medical, which is another charity that he started. And he set up a clinic once a month in all the Appalachian towns.
Really? I didn't know about that. So that's separate from the MAP
Oh, yeah,
program.
this
That's
is,
Oh, yeah,
They're
very
based in
much.
Tennessee.
And
Okay.
in fact, Irene would go with us, and we all had a job to do. And he was very good at getting volunteers. Stan would have maybe a dozen doctors. He would have dentists. He would have people that did eyeglasses and things like that. And hundreds and hundreds of people showed up
When was this?
during the
Well, Wings of Hope,
during the 90s, late
90s?
90s,
Okay.
and early 2000s.
but in the early 2000s, Wings of Hope formed a relationship with RAM. That's it.
Aeronautical, yeah.
And Eddie and I flew the airplane from here to Guyana, South America, because that's where Stan really had his center of interest in.
You should read his book. He wrote a book. He was actually English, and his parents in England sent him over to South America, sent him to Brazil. And he worked on a ranch down there. They wanted him to learn something. And
He was walking around Georgetown. He told me, and he lived with us for about a month or two. And he said he saw this little sign about a ranch in the interior. And so anyway, he got intrigued by that. And he found out a way to get there, and he went out there, and he never left.
he became the
deserved
ranch
it.
foreman. And the
He
book
wrote-
that he wrote is called All the Cowboys Were Indians.
And they were,
And they were.
except
we might have that
except
book
for him.
They were all
Should be here.
Brazilian Indians, and they rode horseback, and they didn't wear boots. They took their feet and stuck it in the stirrups.
the big toe.
Really,
on the
really
stirrup.
tough guys.
We spent a year in Belize flying the same medical flights that Dylan and he spoke of, and just had stacks of people's names that I've flown that I remember various details, and it's just amazing the experiences you have and the connections that you can make with people with airplanes and
Yeah,
volunteer
yeah,
help. So
yeah. Jane?
You know, all you had to do was when you went to these villages where we had before, say Wings of Hope, they loved you.
Yeah,
They recognized Wings of Hope, and they were so happy to see you.
Sometimes they'd show
And
up.
they wanted to give you things.
sure, sometimes the 16-year-olds would show up with machine guns, but usually they weren't loaded, so you didn't have to worry about it too much.
How long were you there? Just a couple of years?
A year in Belize and about 6 months in Guatemala.
And you were flying for Wings of Hope?